In the meantime, I will try to give you a brief summary of what was discussed this morning. Well, that can never take place without forgetting to mention things. But we started with Frank Le Prévost on the European situation, the emphasis on replicability. And also what I liked very much was your mentioning of the validity of experimental settings and the Brussels machine, if you remember. Then Geert Molenberg sketched the grey area where it's not really always fraud, but also flaws in the research setting, and also mentioned cultural differences and gave an example on confounding variables. André van Stertegem introduced us to the VCWI and the proceedings, and what intrigued me was your mentioning of the increase of sensibility of issues that you would like to see. And then, let me see, Olivier Beume ended with a talk on Science Europe, on NRIO. He mentioned the World Conferences on research integrity and the work on harmonization that still needs to be done. And then we proceeded with the 4/5 talks. 5 talks by 4 people on the university policies, and what I liked a lot is that we and Chris, but also Inge, ended with the mentioning that teaching research integrity at the end of the day is what matters, and that makes my heart grow as a teacher in statistics. So before we open the discussion, I would like to explore how many questions are there in the audience. Can you please raise your hand if you have a question? 1, 2, 3. I think we can safely start with that. There is somebody walking around with a microphone. Can you please, before you ask your question, state your name?
Hello, I am Karel Lietaert and I am a PhD student at the KU Leuven. And I have a question for you regarding post-publication peer review. And this is mostly linked to Mr. Le Prévost, his talk, I think. And I will start telling you a case. And so I just started as a PhD student, which means I had to do some research, some reading of literature, of course. And I found a paper in my field, which was, according to me, not very correct. And there had been some sloppiness of data. And then I sent my complaint, between brackets, to the editor of the journal, who sent it to the corresponding author. And by now I did not get any response yet. So then I think about stating my complaints online, for example, on ResearchGate, which might be familiar to you, which is a social network for researchers and who encourage post-publication peer review. And now I would like to know what you think of this tool, for example, ResearchGate. Do you think this is really valuable in the detection of fraud or not? Thank you.
Okay. Frank, would you like to respond to that?
I have to push. Thank you very much for this question. I'm very happy that you raised it. I'm not sure I have a good answer to it. My answer would be that the principles of trust and of honesty that have been mentioned at the end of the last presentation are principles which should prevail globally. Now, in this particular case, putting it online is on this site. Maybe it is a good approach, but there is always, if I want to be honest towards you, and I would like to be aware that you will be known after that as a private person, as somebody who raised this issue, and that you will have to live with that as well along the following years. So I guess that it would be wiser, maybe at this point of the process, maybe to recontact again the editor and say, well, this, in my view, was not correctly done. I don't know what kind of paper it is and so on. It doesn't matter. But if you rephrase it saying, this, in my view, was not completely correctly done, and have you done something in this regards, and if yes, what, and if no, be aware that I do not exclude to put this kind of information on a more global towards a more global audience. Maybe this will have an impact, and at the same time, don't impair your future in the scientific community. I know it is not maybe the answer you would like to have heard, but this, I have a little bit of experience as well, and I would like to protect also a little bit the future of your career, and that you have to find a balance. And I think that there is a way to address your problem and at the same time protect your future.
Thank you. André?
Yes, I will now talk from my experience as an editor of a journal, where we sometimes have this kind of post-publication, queries about what we published. And I think this is a good point for a journal that this happens, because one should never forget that the publication is not the end of that piece of research. It may evolve further on. Like you said, you looked at an article that is published and you have some questions. That doesn't mean that you think there is fraud in the case, but I think I would encourage you not to give up after you didn't get a positive answer. I think if you have a real case, what you could propose to the journal is write a letter to the editor and explain him clearly why you think there is something wrong with it, or whether you question something, not being wrong in the terms of fraud, but I think post-publication peer review is extremely important, because a publication is not the end of the story. So I would encourage not to give up after thing and continue.
Thank you. Okay. There was another question.
My name is Francis Tuurlings, KU Leuven. Well, I have a question, I don't know for whom, but maybe for Olivier Beume from the FWO. There have been a lot of talks about the fraud and sanctioning and so on, questionable research practices and these kinds of things. But I wonder, what are the stimuli or the incentives from, let's say, an organization like the FWO to make sure that people, for instance, put their data online, make them publicly available. Maybe also, and that's more for the universities, and what are the thoughts about giving a financial stimulus for a data repository? Is there anything that can be done that is in the line of what is mentioned before, the Open Science Framework, which is a repository for data and publications and protocols? Are there any thoughts about that?
Olivier?
Well, two other dedicated working groups of Science Europe, for instance, are respectively on open access and open data. Now, I must say that, of course, these issues are very strongly linked to research integrity, but that is not the only ratio behind it. And so these very complex discussions have not ended yet, to say the least, because of a whole set of reasons. And not every organization, not every country even, is as enthusiastic about open access. There are a lot of opinions and also of interests to be taken into account. And to be honest, also in Flanders, we don't have a consensus on that. So what we do ask is that anyway, any publication on the basis of FWO-funded research is published in so-called open access green. This is to say, after maximum 1 year, the article should be available to the public for free by one of, well, mostly that should be that could be an institutional database or another one. And of course, I think, and now I'm more speaking from my own background as a humanities researcher. I'm an historian by training, for your information, and because you spoke about the different domains and a domain-specific approach for research integrity, I think this is really due, because from an article or a book I and many of my colleagues have written, you already have all the data and proof in hand, or you can go to the library or to the archives or etc. The problem for open data and for its use for research integrity issues is especially with the biomedical and positive sciences, because there you have statistics, etc., surveys you used that are not open, because you can't say, well, they are there and go to it. You can check and read for yourself. No, you have to present them because they are in your PC or on your database at university. So this is a more specific framing of the problem. And as I said, it is important, but this is so complex because there are so many interests and opinions involved.
André?
Yes, just for your information, if you look at the British Medical Journal of the last week, and that's open access, you will read the story about the antiviral treatment with neuraminidase, which was used against flu. And it took some researchers to get the truth, more than 10 years, to have all the data files of 2 pharmaceutical companies, namely Roche and GSK, GlaxoSmithKline, to have finally the whole data. And the result of this is really astonishing, indicating that the data available of all the research did not indicate that there was any benefit in treating with antiviral drugs. And so all countries who had stockpiled because of the fear of a flu epidemics have spent billions of euros or dollars or whatever to have this. And now comes out the truth. But it took 10 years that before the pharmaceutical companies give all their data regarding, and it was then finally the Cochrane review who found out. Just, to give an illustration of the importance of openness about all the available sources.
It's a very good point, and I'm also working in biomedical sciences, and the often heard argument, more so in the past than now, is of pharmaceutical companies also, we own the data. And that means they cannot be made public, because then we give away our competitive edge. I think what we just heard from André is a very good counterexample to that, but also not having the data available inhibits certain research. So it's not that then bad research is done, that's one thing, but also some research can simply not be done because the data are not available. And an area in which I'm working is surrogate endpoint validation. publication. And also for that, that's another example where you need lots of data, ideally across several pharmaceutical companies, and then they need to be pooled in a certain type of meta-analysis. I will not make it too technical, but of course, if everybody would adopt that attitude that the data cannot be shared, then such research cannot be done, and it may ultimately mean that suboptimal research is done, or certain products never make it, etc. On the other hand, if we then say, by definition, without any exception, without any discussion, data should be available in their fullest form, that's also, I would say, too extreme to the other side. I'm also an editor of a journal, Biostatistics, not to make any publicity, and we have a number of codings for a paper. For example, there is a C for when code is available, a D for when data is available, and you can go one step further and have an R when it's reproducible, and that means somebody independently used the code and the data to check the result. It's no guarantee, but of course it's a label, and sometimes that label is not there, meaning the paper is published, but at least one of those was not fully satisfied. And there can be good reasons for that. Even if you make data available, let me take an example, the Belgian Health Interview Survey. It's something coming from the government. So you would think, we are the government, we own the money for that, it's the taxpayers, as they would say, at the other side of the ocean, so we have the right to have the data available. Of course, there is another important discussion, and that's privacy. If we just, and I said it deliberately, very, let's say, unshaded, data have to be available to the fullest. That means names and addresses. That's another area we have to think about. If you say, for example, yes, but we only say it's a farmer from Herstappa with 7 children, we know who that is, of course. If you, by the way, say it's a farmer with 7 children from the center of Antwerp, you also know who it is, because I don't think there are any. But that's a debate that also needs to be carefully done. I don't know the answer, but I'm just pointing to the fact that that's an important debate.
Okay, Frank?
Well, yes. One further comment. There are also some research which are, asked by governments or ministries, where they ask you to delete the data after some years, for instance. So that raises also a lot of questions about how will you be able to reproduce the studies after a while? Are they valid? Yes or no? These kind of things. But we have at our university we have examples where. We were proposed to conduct some research, provided the data will be destroyed after 10 years, and so on. So, yeah.
Anne?
Can I give one additional comment on this discussion? Is about there's one major issue that we forget, is that open access and open data goes with a cost. And well, in Flemish level, we have the Flemish Supercomputing Center, where we joined forces since a couple of years. And one of the main discussions we had at the level of the board of directors of the Hercules Stichting is about what we're going to do with the storage of the data from this computing. Mm. And then we didn't start about open data yet, and we didn't start about procedures and protocols. And like one of you said earlier today, is that most of the results of the data are on a stick of the computer, of one of the researchers. And when this researcher leaves the university, he takes a stick.
Yeah. Chris.
I recently heard that the VIB, Flemish Institute of Biotechnology, has set up a dedicated server for raw data upload. So I think they give a good example. It can be done, it's technically feasible, and if they succeed, why not others as well?
Yeah, we have it as well in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't receive the money for it.
You don't receive money for it?
With the Flemish universities, we don't receive the money for that. So we don't even receive dedicated money anymore for the electronic databases for publication. So it's a pity that the representative of the minister has left the audience. But if we open the discussion...
She knew this was going to happen.
If you open the discussion, and I hope that it will be done also together with FWO, that we do not forget that this goes with a certain cost.
Yeah. Okay.
Very well aware that, and I'm happy you mentioned it, I forgot, but of course the financial The same goes for open access, but that's another story.
Thank you. I think we had a third question still.
Hello, I'm Kurt Barbier, one of the coordinators of Flames. So I'm happy that I start hearing some opinions about the journals involved, because I think protecting integrity also starts with the journals publishing the material to spread faulty information. Now, as a member of an editorial board myself, I think there are some issues with the journals also. One issue is that some journals are reluctant in publishing rebuttals because it can harm their reputation. Secondly, a lot of journals start publishing the data after publication, but I haven't seen, or I'm not aware of journals, even the statistical journals, where you can submit data for the reviewing process. So I'm happy to hear some comments about that.
Maybe Geert?
Yeah, I think I can say a few things from several roles, as an author also, as an editor, and then everything in between. Journals, of course, can have a very detrimental effect. It's a model that emerged a number of 100 years ago. It's still there, but it's kind of hitting its limits in a way, I think. And a question to consider is not just how is a journal operated, but who publishes a journal and who actually makes money from it, if anybody. It could be a statistical society or a scientific society in general. That's one thing. It could be, let's say, a commercial publisher. I will not mention the names of the Klugers and the Elsevier's, but that's the ones I'm thinking of. That's a different matter. And indeed, journals are very concerned. The word hasn't been said. It's actually amazing this late in the day, but the impact factor. Many people from more mathematically oriented sciences have studied the impact factor, have pointed repeatedly to flaws in the concept, etc. And saying that the impact factor is important and all overriding, it's saying like, you are your body mass index. You aren't, are you? I mean, it's one characteristic of many, and there can be two people with exactly the same body mass index, but medically totally different cases. Well, the same with impact factor. So we have this measurism, this measuritis, we could almost say. We measure all that stuff. That in itself actually contributes to the issue, because then, of course, we know that we are starting to behave according to the measures used. Even journal editors do that. And I've had cases where an editor requested me, yes, your paper is accepted, if you could cite at least 5 more papers from other authors from the same journal, because that's good for our impact factor. Of course, other authors, because the self-citations wouldn't count. Or authors could indeed take a decision and say, well, we have a more genetically oriented paper and a more epidemiologically one. Maybe the first one will contribute to the impact factor more. We accept that, we don't accept the other. You may never know that as an author, or not even as a referee or an associate editor, that somebody took a decision like that in their mind. And these are all detrimental effects of that. Now, people that are gently getting older, like myself, actually then say, yeah, but we have to be careful with all these new things, and is it all verified and people just post it? Is that then the way forward? Well, I don't know, but I would like to point to Wikipedia. If I'm traveling, or even if I'm not traveling, and I want to have something quick on a distribution, say, I usually look it up on Wikipedia. And very often I'm amazed by the quality of the material you find there. And of course, as good scientists, we then check it later in a book, and yet another book, and yet another source. But as a first go, you might say it's a different model from what it used to be, because when I was a PhD student, we didn't use Wikipedia at all, for a very good reason, of course, that you can guess. It's there all of a sudden, it sprang up, and it has, in many areas, good qualities. Now, and we should be fair and say, yes, but there are errors, so yeah. But we were talking about errors in the peer-reviewed classical literature as well. So we should give these new models a chance and learn from that. Don't do away with things that actually are useful. For example, careful copy editing. My father was a printer, so I'm very biased towards very carefully crafted sentences, very well typeset papers, because the message is important, but the way it's transferred is also important. But one does not exclude the other. So all these good aspects of the various models should be combined and given a chance, I think. And some of these things will actually happen automatically. And it's actually good that the discussion is asked and that people are nowadays asking the questions much more than they were asked 20 years ago. So I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. Thank you, Geert. I read somewhere that Wikipedia is considered as reliable as Encyclopedia Britannica. So, what if I heard of this initiative that journals have this tendency, of course, have had this tendency of accepting publications, but now there's this initiative that you first have to write a research proposal. And then the journal will have a look at it. Of course, it builds enormously on the, it asks enormously of the capacity of the journal, but I would like to see what you think of that initiative.
Well, yes, that may be the case, but there are so many different approaches and policies of the different journals. And the one you mentioned is a recent one and may have some value. But regarding in general to the publication ethics that was involved also by the by the person who asked the previous question, I would encourage you to look at the website of COPE, www.publicationethics.org. I'm a member of it, I'm the secretary of it, but it's not a commercial. It's a completely voluntary position, but it has the advantage that it has now 9,000 members, and a member is a journal. And to become a member of COPE, you need to adhere to the code of conduct of COPE. So just a suggestion, have a look at COPE, and also if you have queries about how to handle your differences of opinion with a journal, look at the website. You will find some good answers there.
I'm looking in the audience if I see other questions popping up over here.
I am Lea Vermeer. I am a professor emeritus. I want to state the following question because it was raised to me last year. We talk about reproduction of results, but as a young researcher, doing reproduction, arriving at the same results, you get difficulty to have it published. That's really, I think that's a problem. Does this problem arise in every discipline? Are there ideas about how to solve this?
Yes, André?
I think it's true that some journals will say this is not originally love to be taken into account. But more and more, I think nowadays there is also the tendency that it is important that certain new things are confirmed and are reproducible. And if you see some of the scandals that were mentioned during this morning, you will see that it was while people were trying to reproduce some fantastic result, just as adding some acid to a cell line to obtain induced pluripotent cells. I think it's during these experiments, and I think nowadays also funding agencies will be aware and will accept that certain things needs to be reproduced in science.
Frank?
Yeah. Yes, no, this is a very sensible subject. I guess that it's not absolutely necessary to reproduce any result, and my private feeling is that there are too many things published anyhow. So that's that's one point, and that there is probably 80% garbage out of all what is produced and claimed as a scientific paper. Now, out of the papers which have a societal impact, like the ones mentioned for life science, which lead to drugs or lead to new laws or new approaches to education or whatsoever, then, or austerity, as I mentioned before, whatever. As soon as it has a societal impact of that size, before taking the step of implementing it, I would highly recommend to reproduce it. Now, don't forget that there is a kind of gray zone, that, as you mentioned, but nevertheless, there is a level of responsibility. The responsibility of the scientist is to provide to policymakers, when they want to implement something, some relevant information on which they can base their laws and whatsoever. On the other side, this is the full responsibility of the politicians to go in direction A or in direction B. But I believe that there is, at some point, a dialogue that should be there. And once you decide to implement a law, be sure, and if you claim that it is based on scientific evidence, check it twice before making the step. Step can be good or wrong. But if you, at the end, maybe it is good that there is some level of austerity policy in Europe. I don't say that you have to spend more than you earn. I never said that. But if you base it on a scientific paper, and this scientific paper does not make sense, then there is a gap in the logic of how you decide at the political level. So here, for these things which have such an impact, do it again. And yes, invest some money for it, but it will pay off.
Geert, you wanted to say something? Or
No,
was I mistaken by that?
I'm pretty fine, I think, right now.
Okay. Are there any other questions from the audience? Not right now, because I'm thinking there's a lot of PhD students in the audience, and they will be, after this morning's plenary session, either petrified that their research results will be flawed, or they will be held accountable, or they are relieved that finally they will be listened to. So I'm thinking something that Chris mentioned this morning. How could we teach, how could we build in education the notion of validity and reliability of research that I heard you mentioned indirectly and directly so often this morning? To give you one example, in my own statistics class, I have students reproduce one article where there's a covariance matrix that is printed. And I think I've done this for 7 years now. And out of the 30 students that did this, I think only one was able to reproduce that particular study with the covariance matrix. So how can we build in this notion in education, was my question. Nobody? Yeah, Geert?
I'm happy to say something. I think it has to do a little bit also with sufficiently slow science. We should give you said there is too much stuff being published. We all fully agree with that. It has to go fast, etc. And I think we're now again seeing the limits of that. And I was alerting to earlier, the evaluation procedures that we are using as a worldwide community are detrimental. I mean, they're really they're pushing us in the wrong direction. Am I saying we should not do anything like that? No, not of course not. There should be evaluation. We should be held accountable for the money we get to do research, etc. But the quantitative fetishes that we have created now, they're really detrimental. And I think also as senior scientists, it was very clear in Chris's presentation, I believe, that it's not the PhD student, it's actually the professors who should first and foremost look at what is being done, and the bosses they pretend to have. So I think it's very important that we set the example. If we discover an error, we should be the first to admit it, to rectify it, etc., to bring it out, make stuff accountable, and even if we found a mistake ourselves in our own work, we should be the first to come out with it. Something like that happened, I think, just 2 days ago, together with another colleague of my level of seniority. We were talking with a PhD student. Both of us were convinced that we were right and the PhD student was wrong. And we got him convinced of the fact that we were right. On checking it later that day, we discovered the reverse. So we immediately told him, after all, you were right, sorry about that, but we all learned something. And he was a little surprised. There was also a cultural component involved, because he said, it's a little strange that you say that. But that made me think, okay, if that's true, maybe some aspects of the culture should be changed a little bit. I think nobody has the authority to say it's right because I say so. And that's, of course, that's a very important aspect. I always say everybody can make mistakes except my mother, because she told me my whole life that's not possible, but everybody else can. I think that's an important aspect.
So what you're actually saying is that the professors should be a role model.
Yeah, and do the best they can. And a role model in being fallible and being curious to find something, to find the truth, whatever it may mean, rather than write a paper and get it published. Okay, that's a consequence, but that's not a goal.
No. Okay. You want to say something, Chris?
Maybe there's something to say about the universities, because we have the CP snow and the two worlds. And what I notice, if I sit in a humanities, there's much more eagerness to debate and to discuss. And in my own faculty, it's a little bit less. There's much more eagerness to perform and to deliver outputs, maybe too much output indeed. But if I teach my students about the very initial things of how science and research started in the old Greece with Plato and Socrates, then in fact thinking started as a dialectic process, which means you put something and then you have an opposite opinion, the antithesis. So you have a thesis and an antithesis, and then you have debate, because both parties are equal and they can be right or wrong. And sometimes Socrates was also playing that he was not so smart, and that was the very nice start of the process of intellectual thinking. And especially in the applied sciences and the faculties that, of applied sciences, we sometimes forget it a little bit. We could learn a little bit more about our colleagues in the humanities, because they are more eager to debate and put something in the opposite and see what happens. So I would like to have that mentality back in my own faculty.
Thank you. Okay, Geert.
I'm glad you say that, Chris. I feel very strongly about that, because we've lost that tradition of debate for many reasons. There is pressure. There are also cultural components, and I will briefly expand on that. You're totally right. It depends on the area in which you are working. I go to conferences where for example, let me take a big one, the Joint Statistical Meetings of the American Statistical Association, where invariably you have sessions of contributed speeches of 11 minutes 48 seconds. And then it always happens that people run out of time for questions. Now that happened in the past too, and then they say, we will postpone the questions to the end of the session. That's a euphemism for no questions. But it's gotten to the point that this is getting the norm. And if there is time for a question and somebody then asks a question, the chair almost looks like irritated, because now, I've always felt that not the talk, but the questions are important, because that's where, for a subject I don't know so well, I don't understand the talk necessarily very well, but through the questions I get something. And by seeing indeed the dialectic process, you see there are different views on something, and perhaps not even a consensus is possible, but at least you see the entire process. I think we are pretty much dictated by the clock way too much, and that's different in different cultures. There are also cultures where, again, that questioning process is seen like being disloyal to the master, and that's not done. Now, we can respect that aspect of the culture, but I like the good old-fashioned British style where people would beat each other's ideas to death to get out the real important thing. Go to the library. Take, for example, the Journal of the Royal Statistical Society Series A or B or C from the 1940s or the 1950s, and you will actually get for the red papers those discussions written up. They're very entertaining, and you see how people handled each other. You will see that they sometimes hated each other, well, not just sometimes, and that they therefore attacked the idea. For example, Yule and Kendall had this debate about the odds ratio and the correlation. In 1900 it was published, and one said, the other said, if this idea of Mr. Yule is accepted, irreparable damage will be done to the statistical science. Now, these discussions are entertaining, not just for their entertainment value, because they make you think. From there you start thinking. You say, wait a minute, what do they mean? And that wait a minute moment, that's very important, because that's when science starts, I think.
Frank?
Yes, I like very much this approach to go back to roots, and traditionally the scientific approach is, or the scientific process is to make some observations, then you make hypotheses, and then you confront them with the observations, and then you check, and then if it doesn't match, you say the hypothesis is wrong, and then it is a zero answer. Or if it matches, very often there is a temptation to say the hypothesis is correct, and then this is the one answer. Now there is a theorem in probabilities, which is the theorem of Bayes, and this gives you a more continuous answer, and it addresses, it is a kind of approach of a plausibility versus truth. So truth would be 0 or 1, and plausibility would be something which is between 0 and 1, and where you take into account some additional information along the process, and then you go closer to the truth, but you are not at the level 1 necessarily. So this is maybe a new approach to how what the scientific process is globally, and moving forward from a kind of discrete approach to a continuous approach.
Thank you, Frank. I know we could go on for hours, but I also know that Professor van Stuytgem has to leave. So I would actually like to propose to stop the discussion here and give all these contributors a big round of applause. Karen, François, do you want to say a few words to end this?
I just want to thank the audience for the attention, and also this expert and the people who, the representatives of the university for the roundtable discussion. I think we have to go on with Flames to support the PhD students in the methodology they use in their PhD research. And finally, I will give a small present to the speakers this morning. Thank you all.